Good morning, everybody, and deeply apologize for the slight delay in getting this workshop underway. Let me very warmly welcome all of you to this Inception workshop on low carbon pathways for growth in India, which ICRIER, since this is the Inception workshop, ICRIER beginning this work in collaboration and support of the British High Commission, for which we are extremely grateful. I extend a very warm welcome to the Right Honourable Edward Davey, who is Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change in UK since February 2002. I'm going to refrain from reading out their CVs. They're all eminent people, so I'm going to refrain from doing that. You will have packets of folders with their CVs. Shri Montek Ahluwalia is the former Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission of India and has been a key figure in India's reforms, and he has been, for his outstanding service, conferred the Padma Vibhushan by the President of India. We also have Mrs. Naina Kidwai on the panel, who is Executive Director on the board of HSBC Asia Pacific and the Chairperson India. She is non-executive director of Nestle and as most of you know, the immediate past president of the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. And we also have, to moderate this panel discussion, after a few introductory remarks, we have Mr. Anil Padmanabhan, who's been deputy managing editor of the Mint, a prominent financial daily in India. Let me say a few words before I hand over to the Minister for his introductory remarks, that we are extremely delighted to host this workshop on low carbon pathways for growth in India. As you know, growth in India has declined to 4.7 in 2014, and it's been much higher in the past. The trend rates of growth have been higher in the past, 6% at least, if not 7.5% in the immediate past decade. But growth has slipped. Once growth picks up again, and it should, the risk associated with growth driven by intensive resource use, such as fossil fuel-based subsidies or fossil fuel-based energy, will need to be tackled. Since India has a goal of reducing the emission intensity of GDP, as most of you know, by 20 to 25% over 2005 levels by 2020. We know that India and China are going to be the big users of energy, and therefore there's a lot of focused attention on both these countries. So after some amount of deliberation of our board, and what ICRIER decided in 2010 is to introduce climate change and environment as a thrust area for research, and we are very excited to be working in this area, and we hope, as we've done in the past, to create knowledge and facilitate a constructive public discourse around this extremely critical area of policy. Since we started in 2010, we've done a number of projects that feature both adaptation and mitigation as a part, as I said, of our research, like studying of renewable technologies for the telecom sector, blending of ethanol with petrol, are examples of climate mitigation analysis that we've done in ICRIER. And last year in September, we started a very large project which is called the New Climate Economy, and we are going to, let me put a plug here for ICRIER's other launch, we are going to launch that study on the September 18th, later this year, and for which you will be getting invitations. As part of that research, we've tried to highlight sectors that have strong co-benefits with the mitigation storyline. And we've studied energy demand management, we've studied urbanization, we've studied agriculture, and the co-benefits, as you know, include reduction in air pollution, avoiding health costs, improved agricultural productivity, better managed cities, and improved public service delivery. A clear message that comes out of this research and analysis is that there are many climate actions that have strong co-benefits with desirable outcomes, and these are thus key areas that need to be encouraged in the future. I won't take too much time, so let me quickly say that we have gathered today, as I said, to mark the beginning of a new study that ICRIER is doing with support of the British High Commission. In this study, we are specifically aiming to estimate the costs of environmentally benign growth trajectories. This project, as some of you will know, the web tool developed by the Planning Commission under the stewardship of Shri Montek Ahluwalia, they have come out with an India Energy Security Scenarios IESS 2047. It's on the web, so most of you can go and have a look at it. And that web tool presents information on energy demand and supply situations under various scenarios, you know, heroic scenario, aggressive scenario, etc. And what that scenario building exercise does not do, and which we are going to embark upon in ICRIER now, is that what are the costs associated with those scenarios? And we're trying to estimate that if we go along a certain pathway, what are the costs? As you know, the climate debate internationally is focused on kind of, at least for developing countries, focuses on really what is the financing needs for developing countries to address some of the climate policy problems that we have. So this project will attempt to identify a realistic low carbon pathway that India could achieve while pursuing its development goals. This will help in necessarily articulating policy around a credible low carbon pathway for India. So in particular, we're going to look at costs of action and the costs of inaction on climate policy, and key factors that influence existing models, and we will also do an extensive dissemination exercise in this. I won't speak much more about the project as we'll have the minister speak a bit upon, make introductory remarks, and Montek will set the context, and then we will get Anil to moderate the panel discussion. So without taking much more of your time, let me warmly welcome all of you, and ICRIER is especially delighted that Minister Edward Davey is here to make introductory remarks at this Inception workshop. Thank you, Minister.
Here, and also to speak alongside such experts as Dr. Ahluwalia and Mrs. Lau Kidwai. Thank you very much for joining the panel. I'm really enjoying this, my first trip to India, and not least because I'm able to escape the cricket test match in England. But I've been so impressed by the ministers I've met, the academics, and industry leaders, and their commitment to this agenda. In Ahmedabad yesterday, I saw how Gujarat has turned around its energy system and is taking climate change seriously and is benefiting from that policy combination. Just as in the UK, actually, I'm seeing how local action aligned with national policy can work to produce green growth, low carbon growth, convenient action, as Prime Minister Modi has written. And my argument to you today is that if we add true international cooperation to this mix of green growth and convenient action, we can solve the global crisis of climate change. For it is a crisis. Climate science is proven, climate change is real, it's now, and this crisis isn't going to go away. The results are evident in the changing weather patterns around us, the floods and the droughts, the crop failures, the low crop yields, more extreme weather events, desertification, sea levels rising, perhaps even the delays to the monsoon season. The evidence of a growing crisis surely reinforces the need for early action in the UK, in India, and around the world. And with the damaging impacts of climate change accelerating, we simply cannot afford to wait. But acting on the evidence of climate change won't be easy. As a politician, I know action for any change is never easy. And that means we have to gain support for change from across society. We have to demonstrate that climate change action, going green, provides jobs and can stimulate growth just as powerfully, in fact more so, than the old model of economic growth. And as the Gujarat model I saw yesterday shows, it is a myth that India has to choose between the environment on the one hand and growth and development on the other. It is a false choice. We can have both. For it is no longer true that low carbon technologies have to be expensive. Costs are coming down rapidly. In India itself, costs for solar energy have come down by almost 60% in the last 5 years. making it competitive with new coal-based generation. Costs of energy storage have declined by 30% globally. Electric vehicle costs have decreased by around 50%. Highly energy efficient appliances are now competitive on capital cost terms with old models. And the new low carbon technologies on the horizon, such as carbon capture and storage, smart grids, intelligent traffic management systems, and new energy efficient manufacturing processes, are showing every sign of following the same cost reducing pathway. Indeed, I recommend you all to keep an eye out for a new report from the Global Commission on Climate and Economy. As Dr. Kathuria has said, this report is called The New Climate Economy and is expected to be released just ahead of the United Nations Secretary General's Summit on climate change in New York in September. ICRIER's involvement in this work has been crucial, as you all see when it is published. I believe this report will provide further independent and authoritative evidence on how policies to strengthen economic performance can also reduce the risk of dangerous climate change. So what is the UK doing to move to a low-carbon economy? Well, we passed the groundbreaking act, the Climate Change Act of 2008, and that committed us legally to reducing damaging greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050. And we're making progress. This week I confirmed to the House of Commons our fourth carbon budget, which will see carbon emissions down by 50% by 2027. And in order to meet this challenging target, Britain is investing in a wide range of low-carbon technology, from nuclear power to carbon capture and storage, from offshore wind farms to tidal energy. Indeed, we've radically reformed our electricity markets, so over the next few years, we are creating the world's first ever low-carbon electricity market. In just 4 years, we've more than doubled our renewable generation, started 2 carbon capture storage projects, and seen agreement for the first nuclear power plants in a generation. This diversity in the energy mix is absolutely crucial. And in Europe, Britain has been pushing hard for the EU to agree demanding climate change targets too. And beyond Europe, Britain is working to help other countries with major financial support. Our International Climate Fund is worth £3.9 billion and is helping the world's poorest countries to adapt to climate change and promote cleaner, greener growth. But we need to see more international action on climate finance support. So, for example, Britain wants to see the Green Climate Fund properly capitalised by the end of the year. So if Britain is acting, as we are, should India act? Well, India is certainly a crucial part of solving the global climate change challenge. And I believe India will benefit itself if it chooses to play an active role, not just domestically, but internationally too. Yes, the transition to a low-carbon economy will need time, of course, and it will need resources. But it can also generate the enormous benefits we've been talking about. As your Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, has said in his book, Convenient Action, climate change is not only an environment issue, but also a development issue. I completely agree with him. Climate action will mean greater energy security and cut back on India's imports of energy, saving resources. Climate action will mean sustainable jobs and growth in the green economy. And climate action will generate significant co-benefits, as we've heard about, not least from improved air quality. That's why the World Bank estimates cleaner air could be worth as much as 1.7% of GDP, although I've heard earlier today in my discussions that it could be worth far more than that, and maybe others will pick that up. But whether it's 1.7% of GDP or higher, that is a huge benefit, far outweighing the costs of action. HSBC's report this April argues India is now suffering more severe air pollution than China, with all the appalling health damages that brings to young children and to our elderly in particular. And that's why I think India has decided to act and is acting. India's own economic and development self-interest is now linked to the global need for climate action. And it is in this joint interest of the UK and India to work together for low carbon growth that I want to turn to. Yesterday I had an excellent meeting with the Honourable Minister Goel. It reaffirmed to me that the UK-India Energy Partnership is making a valuable contribution, but I hope we can do more. In fact, both of us agreed we should do more. We are already working with India on key issues: renewables, solar, offshore wind, where we actually are leading the world, tidal energy in West Bengal, power sector reforms, helping India to reduce transmission and distribution losses, and integrating renewable energy into the grid. Energy efficiency, where we are working with the government on demand-side management, standards and labelling for appliances, and the Perform, Achieve and Trade scheme for industry. From this visit, I really want to strengthen and deepen this valuable partnership with India to ensure energy security and prosperity for both our nations, to fight the climate challenge so we can transition to a low-carbon growth trajectory together. At different rates, yes, you'll probably grow a lot faster. But in different ways. Of course we'll have to approach this in different ways. But we can do it by working together. So colleagues, despite all the worries about the climate science and what it's telling us, I am actually optimistic. The science has given us an understanding of the scale of the climate problem we face, but science and technology is also providing us with the tools we need to tackle the challenge with. The next few years, in fact the next 18 months, will be definitive for the global fight on climate change. We have the critical UNFCCC summit, the Global Climate Change Talks in Paris in 2015, when we have the chance to get a world agreement. I'm determined that together we'll work for that. We'll turn this climate change challenge into an opportunity that helps us develop, helps us cut poverty, and helps us go green. Whether you agree with me or not, I'm looking forward now to hearing your views, and particularly the panel's contributions. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. May I request Montek Singh Ahluwalia to make his introductory remarks, please?
How many minutes? 5 minutes? 5 to 7.
Thank you very much, Rajat, and let me welcome Minister Davey. It's great to see you here participating in this important discussion. You know, I've been asked to say a few things about how India has been approaching the whole low-carbon growth issue. You've just met the minister, so you have an updated view, but I think most of what I'm going to say is about the work that was done in the Planning Commission up to the middle of May. I don't think that there'll be any real change in many of these things. I think the important point to note is that whatever happens in the global negotiations, the outcome of COP21 in Paris later in the year, I mean, India is engaged on the issue of climate change, not just internationally, but looking at what we can do domestically. And I think this is relatively recent because for the last 2 or 3 years, there have been many national targets set. Rajat mentioned one of them, reducing emissions intensity, energy intensity, etc. I mean, the way we looked at it is, from a climate point of view, really what matters is emissions. I mean, the more the emissions, the worse it is for climate. And I gather from many people that the target for the second half of the century, nobody quite says exactly when in the second half, the world should go to zero net emissions. That's a humongous target to achieve, but it's good to know that that's the objective. So the idea is, how do emissions go down? All the disputes internationally, of course, are on the distributional issue. I mean, who's going to be reducing, who's going to be increasing for a while and then reducing, etc. And I can well imagine that that'll take a lot of time to resolve. But I share your view that we will see progress between now and COP21. And if you, how you define an agreement is very difficult. there are minimalist definitions on which you could get an agreement. There are maximalist definitions on which that's unlikely, but there's no doubt that there'll be progress. So now let me just shift to the Indian picture, because obviously whatever we do globally has to be grounded in an understanding in India that what we're doing is good for the country. Now, from that point of view, the name of the game is really how to reduce emissions as a ratio of GDP. So emissions as a ratio of GDP is just emissions as a ratio of energy multiplied by energy as a ratio of as a proportion of GDP. So the energy on both sides cancels out and you get emissions divided by GDP. And most of the actions that people talk about are either simply reducing energy in relation to GDP, a pure energy efficiency issue. Whatever progress we make on reducing energy as a percent of GDP, if the composition of energy remains the same, that's obviously going to lead to lower emissions also. On the other hand, given some improvement in the energy efficiency side, if we can also improve the composition of energy to move away from carbon to cleaner fuels, then you get a bigger bang for the buck in terms of emissions. And actually what we've been trying to do is to quantify what are the possibilities for India. Now, the good news is there are a lot of possibilities, and there should be no doubt in anyone's mind that we can actually achieve pretty good growth and have a substantial reduction in the emissions trajectory compared to the baseline. I'm not saying actually reduce emissions from the current level. I don't think anyone thinks that that's serious. But between having an optimal path and having a business as usual path, there can be a very big difference. And there were two major pieces of work done in the last year which attempt to quantify this. One was a committee that had been set up by the Planning Commission on low carbon growth. I see that some of the representatives who are going to be participating in the technical side were part of that committee. And another was a parallel exercise done in the Planning Commission, which was called Alternative Energy Security Scenarios. Now, the low carbon growth path exercise was an actual economic model. This one is more like a calculator. It enables you to lay out a whole lot of reasonable assumptions and play around with those assumptions. The two are not as different as it might seem. I mean, most models which endogenize something, endogenize it only on the basis of some extreme oversimplification. This thing makes the simplification rather explicit, and this is where I should thank the UK government because they were really very helpful in getting this done. The calculator we have is actually modeled on what the UK government itself has for itself, and I believe they're doing it for other countries also. Now, this thing is, at least it was, and I'm sure it still is, on the web. So basically, anyone who's actually interested can go to the Planning Commission website, click onto the energy security scenarios, and essentially what it lays out is there are about half a dozen or so sectors where we are making assumptions about energy efficiency, and then there's about 11 or so supplying sectors where you can make assumptions about which one is going to grow more and which one is going to grow less. Some are more carbon dependent, others are not. And with your own preferred scenario, I mean, this thing, for each of these demand sectors, it spells out about 4 alternative possibilities. And for each of the supply sectors, it spells out 4 alternative possibilities. So by combining all these things, you can get very different trajectories, all calibrated around something like an average 7% growth path. We chose the terminal date as 2047, not 2050, because it also happens to be the 100th year of India's independence. So we thought that most people don't take much interest in carbon and emissions, but somehow they might be interested in knowing what's it going to be like at the 100th year of our independence. And the error between that and 2050 is likely to be small. So that was one part. The low carbon model was for 2030, and actually they are not too different from each other. Now, very roughly, calibrated around a 7% growth path, you could either end up in 2047 with emissions per capita of something like 6 tons per capita compared to 1.7 now. Is it 6 or is it 5.6? 5.6, something like that. Or in a best